glad you're here. My name is Crispina French, and I'm your host of the Rags to Riches podcast. I'm an OG textile alchemist, worked my way through art school making ragamuffins from thrift store sweaters way back in the 1980s. That college side hustle grew into a full-fledged business, and here I am to show you that you can do that too. Together, we'll navigate hurdles, challenges, and accomplishments while crafting your profitable textile upcycling business to serve you and the planet. My guests and I will cover topics including material sourcing, business savvy, product development, sales and marketing, and self-care. Overcoming struggles, celebrating wins, and reaping rewards of running your very own textile upcycling business is what we are all about. Are you ready to be inspired, energized, and supported? This is the Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast. This episode of the Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast is brought to you by The Unruffled. The Unruffled is a vibrant and feminine collection of slow-made garments and accessories handmade with love by Sandra Primo. Sandra is based in Austin, Texas, and every item she makes is thoughtfully constructed from finely sourced, reused textiles, favoring silks and lace and crochet. Bespoke, one of one, encouraging an infinite circle of recovery. Step into the world of The Unruffled at www.theunruffled.com. And visit the show notes page for this episode at ragstorichestextileupcyclingpodcast.com for links and more information. So today I am with a guest called Eliu Hernandez. And Eliu has, actually, I've been kind of following you around Instagram for a while, Eliu. Like, I didn't ever, I don't know. I just found your feed on Instagram and I just was kind of blown away by the sensibility of the fabrics and how you put them together. And the work I've seen of yours is predominantly denim, and we'll talk more about that. But this guy makes the most amazing, there's history in his work. You can see the history as you look at the work. You can see the stories that came with the fabrics. And I'm really excited to learn more about you and your process, Eliu. Welcome to Rags to Riches podcast. I can't wait to learn more.
Thank you so much for having me. I think I just counted about 17 compliments all up in a row. So that's a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. So share a little bit, I know you live out in Colorado, right outside of Denver, and share a little bit about your process and how textile upcycling kind of fits in for you into the other things you have going on in your life.
I wear multiple hats. I am a husband. I am a father to a now turned 3-year-old. I work as a chiropractor. That's my full-time job. And then somewhere on that priority list is what I do with my creative side, and that's making things out of used things. I think that's one of the simpler ways of putting it. And I make quilts, I make stuffed animals, I make all kinds of other things, and I use reclaimed materials. Used, sometimes people's trash, sometimes people's throwaways, and I try to make beautiful, functional things from those used materials. And so I get really excited by trying to be as creative as possible, not in the design, but in the materials. See how much used materials I can use into pieces, and that's one of the motivating factors in my work.
Which I have to say I love, and it so imparts itself into the design. I look at your work and I can see that. One of the pieces that's coming to mind for me is one that you did out of all denim waistbands. Let me just tell you, after, I've upcycled a lot of denim in my life, and I've thrown a lot of denim waistbands in the trash can. I actually did say that. I did. So, how cool. And so what sparked your interest in reusing fabrics?
I've had this conversation several times recently, and one of the consistent reasons for different people is the cost of materials. You go into Etsy, you go into a Joann's, you go into a fabric store, and some of those factors can be overwhelming. The quantity of material, the cost of material, the colors, the promotion of all those materials can be overwhelming. And so when I started out, I had the fear of cutting into some of those new materials. And what I found was that if I get a bed sheet or a shirt or a pair of jeans from a thrift store or from a donation, I had a little bit easier time cutting into those materials. And so to answer your question, I think the answer is cost and accessibility to some of these things. And I have a list of favorite thrift stores, both both locally and regionally, and those different thrift stores are on my priority list according to the quality of materials, the organization of the store, the pricing, different factors like that. And I know which stores to go to if I need my bed sheets. I know which stores to go to if I need some shirts. I know which stores to go to if I'm looking for color or a certain design. And so that's
How
how I
cool.
look at things. Yeah, thank you.
That's really cool. And, that brings to mind, like, don't you love, the thrift stores by me, I don't have it. It's not as organized as it sounds like you have it, but there are certain stores that organize all their stuff by color. So if I'm going to if I need to make something, like I make these rainbow rugs, if I need to make a rainbow rug, I go into those stores and I find an empty rack somewhere in the back of the store and I put all my stuff out on hangers and make sure that it's all the colors that I need. And sometimes people think I work there and sometimes I roll with that and I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Or sometimes I'm just like, no, don't take those. Those are mine. But yeah, it's really interesting how the different ways the materials are available really dictates how easy they are to use, how they become, a source of when we're looking for fabric, we know which one to go to for what thing. That's really cool. So did you grow up with a sewing machine? Is that something that you've known how to use since you were a kid, or how did that happen?
My mother was a sewist, and at a young age, I showed interest in textiles, in sewing a little bit, in cross stitching. I've always been a tinker. I've always been creative. I've always been trying to make something out of something else. I've taken as a kid, I took apart so many things that I never put back together. So a tinker. And you're watching me through our screens, and you see that I'm constantly moving back and forth. I'm playing with my hands. I'm a fidgeter as well, and so yeah, for a long time ago, my mother taught me how to thread a sewing machine and how to run some stitches, and so I've had that in the back of my mind for a long time. In the past 18 or 19 years is when I started to rediscover that interest. And so when my girlfriend at the time, before we got married, we lived in an apartment, and I wanted to do woodworking. I wanted to do carpentry. I wanted to do gardening. I wanted to do some kind of creative thing. And living in an apartment didn't allow that. So I had to find something else, and I started making bags, and I had leftovers because I'm a collector. And as a collector, you save things and you put them on the shelf. And so at one point when we were living together, she comes to me and she says, all the stuff that you have on these shelves is taking up my closet space. And so either you need to do something with those materials or I'm going to do something with the materials. And that's a threat of some sort that she did, an ultimatum. And so I knew what she meant. And yes, I was taking up space in a necessary or unnecessary way. And so at that time, my sister was close to being married. And so I took a lot of these leftovers, which at the time were khakis. They were browns and tans and cream and brown colors. And so I took those and I made a quilt for her and her husband. The process for me at that time took about 4 months. And the final quilt was beautiful. It was a Mexico themed wedding. We all went down to a place near Cancun. And so the colors were great for that. But more importantly, the product was wonderful. It came out really well. But more importantly, the process is what really, really hooked me. I loved the deconstruction, the original step in taking clothes apart. I loved the design aspect of it. I loved the piecing. I loved the quilting, and I loved the finishing. And all of those have an element of repetitiveness, of repetition, of monotony, if you want to call it that. And for some people, that's boring and very much not what somebody wants to do. But for me, I find that there's a therapeutic and even meditative quality to those repetitive processes. And so that's one of the things that I really like, and I feel that I really need on a not necessarily a day-to-day basis, but at least a weekly or monthly basis. I need to
Yeah.
get into those kinds of activities for my own sanity.
It's so interesting, Eliu. Like over the last couple of years, my relationship to textile upcycling has really changed. And for years, I ran a production company and I had a bunch of employees. And my dad was an artist, and he asked me one day, "What are you making in the studio today?" And I said, "Oh," and I thought about it, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm making emails and phone calls. That's what I do every day." And that really sparked me to kind of think about how I was structuring my life and get back to that place where I could also sit in that, I call it mindless productivity. It's like cutting the 420 squares that I need for this particular blanket, or and then sewing them, and just like that repetitive, it's like a rhythm that just brings me into, maybe it's called flow state. I think that's what flow state is. I'm not sure, but I totally love that too. And over the last, really, I think it was just about a year ago where I was like, okay, I'm not going to make more product to sell. I want to just focus on making for myself and for my family, and focus on my podcast and do the other things that I do. And it was really recently, like in the last 90 days, where I was just like, I can't. I need to make and sell. I need to get back on that sewing machine. I need to. There's so much. I find so much satisfaction and joy in fixing my sewing machine so that it runs like a top. Like it doesn't, there's no hitting, like, when you turn the needle, and if you can hear the needle hit like a piece of metal, it's not right. And I love, like, I got all my screwdrivers and my little attachments and, my glasses, and I get in there, and it's just, there's so much, satisfaction, contentment, actualization in that process for me. And it sounds like that's kind of what you find in your making process as well, right?
Yes, I fully agree with that. You called your relationship with textiles an ongoing evolution, and I absolutely feel the same way. Right now, I'm very interested and almost probably obsessed with denim, but that's evolved as well, and it could evolve into something else. So yes, that's so interesting to hear you talk about it. And to your audience, I love how animated your hands are all over the place. You're so excited to talk about all of this stuff. Your inflection and your volume change, and you're all over my screen right now. It's fantastic.
And the thing is, like, our podcast listeners only get to hear us. They don't get to see us, but that's okay. I think that it's nice to have this, like, you and I can share, like, it might sound a little weird, and I don't want it to, but it's sort of like this intimacy that we get to share by seeing each other. Well, we get to share our conversation with people who, just listening. For me, I get overwhelmed, like you in the fabric store, with all of those choices and colors and the kind of bombardment of, merchandising and marketing, and I get overwhelmed with video input. I can't, like, I love my life. I love to look at what's around me. I have a really hard time focusing on video content. And I think I was raised without a television, and I think that has something to do with it. Like, I have to either watch it or I have to just not watch it. I can't kind of half watch it. So yeah, I like the audio ness of a podcast. So So you're making denim right now. The work I've seen of yours is amazing. I love how you deconstruct and you kind of unfold and bring to light the history of the parts of the denim that are not faded next to the parts that are, and like it tells the story for me. Like I really probably because I know a lot about how those things came to be. Like I can understand, oh, there was a belt loop there, or oh, that's the inside of the seam that never saw the light of day, or whatever. So I'd love for you to share a little bit, like when so you're making, you just make and then you sell your work, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And
we make for the sake of making,
mm-hmm.
and if I'm lucky enough to be able to sell some of it, I consider that a bonus.
It's beautiful stuff. I think that your aesthetic is there's like a simplicity, but also rugged, and it's yours. It's your own. Like I haven't seen other work that is similar to yours, and I think that for me is a really strong indication of being in touch with your own creativity and not necessarily the influence of those around you.
Thank you. That's a wonderful compliment, and I'd like to touch on that. A few minutes ago, you talked about um, about an idea and a design, and then an execution of that in what I think of as the process for most quilters. For my process, I like to deconstruct. I like to take pieces. I like to use as many materials as possible in their raw state. And so oftentimes I'll get faded versus unfaded, the way you described. Sometimes I'll get weird shapes. Sometimes I'll get tiny little swatches from a belt loop, or incredibly awkward dimensions like a waistband. And I want to incorporate as much of that into a piece as I can. And when that happens, the materials turn out to dictate the design and not the other way around. And so I love that part of the process as well. And so, yeah, I want to be creative. I want to be unique. I want to do stuff that I've never seen before. And if I have an idea, I will research it and I will see if it's been done, how it's been done, how I could do it differently. And that's part of my thought process when I'm doing these kinds of things.
That's so cool. Now, I just want you to think about this for a second. Imagine if you just went to the Joann's. You would not, again, I'm thinking about the belt loop quilt, which was the first piece I saw of yours. I mean, I'm sorry, not belt loop, but the waistband quilt. There's so much more creativity in the execution of that work than there would be. I mean, you probably wouldn't. I don't want to speak for you, but I'm imagining that you might not have thought of creating these very long, narrow rectangles from new fabric. So you're like a conduit. Like you're taking something that is garbage in some people's eyes, right? And you're going like, no, it's not. Let me process that. Let me find this joy, this contentment in my soul. And in that process, I'm going to show you something that is there's a transformation that is very visible in your work. And I feel like now in this conversation, I understand that there's even more meaning to that than the actual finished piece, because the process and that piece that you get to participate in, right?
100%. Everything
Yeah.
you just said, I agree with, and that is how I feel as I'm doing those things. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. So now, I wanted to learn more about like your machine and what type of equipment you use and that kind of thing. But I think we should take a quick break. And if you didn't already hear, I'm talking with Eliu Hernandez, who is, his company is actually called Made or Remade. And if you guys want to see some really notable textile upcycling, go to his Instagram, Made or Remade. And we are going to come back in just a quick second. Today's episode of Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast is brought to you by Swanson's Fabrics. Are you a textile-centric crafter who loves vintage yardage, unusual fabrics, notions, and sewing tools and tutorials? Maybe you're a sewing teacher in need of cool and inexpensive cloth for students. Whether sewing high end bespoke couture or experimenting with new textile making processes, swansonsfabrics.com, located in the heart of Turners Falls, Massachusetts, has just what you need. You can shop online or at the very well organized and jam packed store. Swanson's Fabrics is a thrift shop of fabric, notions, and textile tools. It's a community repurposing the leftover collections of home sewers, addressing the reality that we have enough fabric and craft supplies for generations stored right in our very own attics and closets. Swanson's makes it very easy to pass on an excessive fabric stash and find inspirational treasure for sewing projects. Additionally, Katherine Swanson hosts an online group for entrepreneurs interested in using her business model for fabric thrift stores in their communities. Find Swanson Fabrics at swansonfabrics.com and on TikTok and Instagram. Awesome. So we are back with Eliu Hernandez from Made or Remade. And we were just chatting about his process, and he does do a lot of amazing work in denim. And I love denim as well. And I find that sewing equipment sometimes does not love denim that much. I remember going through a few of my mom's sewing machines and having her be like, how did you break another sewing machine? So do you have an industrial machine that you use? What do you use for sewing?
I have a small, compact, store-bought machine. And the way someone donated a machine to me, and it was heavy duty, it was cast iron, it was beautiful. I can't remember the brand name, but I went to go get it repaired so that I could start using this for denim. And the people there said, this piece is so old, the parts are so difficult to find that it's not going to work out for you. So we can give you a rebate if you purchase one of our machines. And I explained to him that I was going to be doing denim, khaki, canvas, heavier materials. Maybe I was going to work with light leather. I wasn't sure at the time. And he goes, aha. And he took a machine, he took a piece of denim and he folded it. And he ran it through the machine. Butter. He folded that again, 4 layers, and he folded it again into 8 layers, and this was a baby lock machine, small, compact, but packed a punch. And I almost threw my credit card at him in anticipation of purchasing this because that's exactly what I wanted. It has some stitches and something fancy, but for the most part, what I need is penetration through multiple layers of denim, and I need consistency, and that's what this provides. The throat size is just a few inches, so it's not something that's gonna be for everybody, but for my needs, it works out really well. When it comes to some of my other equipment, I go by the same set of rules as other parts of my work, in that I want to use used materials. I want donations, or I want thrifted, or I want used in some other way. And so, yeah, a lot of my tools are from local, smaller stores that are essentially thrift stores for art supplies. There's one in Denver and there's one in Boulder that I frequent. And those places have used materials that they accept donations from the states. They accept people's personal donations. They acquire their used materials from other sources, and that's where I like to shop. At this point, my textiles, I get those from donations. I rarely purchase those anymore. I've done a lot of thrifting. I've gone through my own closet, but at this point in my work, I depend on donations. I guess I misphrased that because I don't depend on donations. I have so much material that I am not allowed to accept donations. My wife has been very clear about don't accept any more donations. And so sometimes I have to go thrifting or accept some donations. But for the most part, currently where I'm at, I have enough materials to last me a lifetime. And that's not an exaggeration.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think cool about the machine, and cool that you have a local provider, so that, when I get asked about equipment a lot, and I just was sharing about how I fix my own machine, which I love doing, but a lot of people don't love doing that. And, when you have a local place, you can go and say, hey, there's something wrong, or I need to have, I need a stitch that's slightly different or whatever. To have somebody to speak to really helps a lot, I think, for people to find the right thing, because you really just don't know when you're shopping without expertise to establish like what machine is going to do that stitch for me, and we have a place that's not too far from me, and it's the same thing. I send people there who are local to just learn about all the different options and see them in work, as working on the floor, so you can actually try them out if you want to, and fold that denim and get those 8 layers through there, right? That's awesome. And then as far as the materials thing goes, I think that I think sometimes, and I think that, as textile upcyclers, oftentimes we are very thrifty, right? That's what we do. We're always looking to like reuse. And so I think there's really good pieces of that. And there's also things that kind of tend to stand in people's way. I feel like because of that kind of predisposition to being thrifty. And what I mean by that is, you're going to find materials and you're going to have them. And, if your wife might not be, she's accepting, she's like, cool, but she's like, you got enough now. Everybody needs a wife like yours, and to tell you got enough now, because some people have way too much, and it's sort of that overwhelm again, like that fabric store, right? Like, where do I start? What material do I use? And I am very careful about the material I bring into my studio, because I need to know that it's going to move through my studio and not get stuck. And I oftentimes I do, like, I just actually purged a ton of stuff because it was not moving through my studio. And I just needed to like clear my head and get that creative thought process back. So it wasn't like, well, I have this stuff, so I might as well use it. But it was more like, oh, okay, now I can kind of refresh, right? So I wonder about that. Like and then the other thing I just want to circle back to before I ask you the question is, I think the thing that's another beautiful aspect of textile upcycling is you say, oh, I get all donations. What that means is that you have a ton of relationships with people who know what you do and appreciate your work, right?
Thank you.
How beautiful is that, right? Like your community said, oh, Eliu is going to need this. Like, I have this beautiful pair of jeans that is not serving me anymore. I'm going to give them to him. So there's so many places where, maybe relationships are not necessarily honored or thought of as being such an integral piece of how the world works. But I believe that relationships are how we walk through the world. And when, and it could be a relationship with your mail delivery person who shows up once a day. Hey, how you doing? Or, who the grocery store bagger or whatever. Or it could be a relationship with someone who, brings you boxes of denim or whatever it is. And it's just a lovely way to promote the reuse aspect, right? Like for people who might not have thought of it.
I totally agree. You said that one thing this says about me is that I've formed these relationships, being able to depend on the donations of these kind people. The other thing that it says about things is that there is an abundance of materials that is not new, that is not expensive, that is not at your local big box store. I am very convinced that if all of us stopped buying new for even a few days, that we could get a lot of materials from in a used context. And I think without trying to wag a finger in anyone's face or slap those ideas into somebody, I want to influence. I want to encourage in a kind, gentle way that we all have that ability. We all have that access to materials that are beautiful, that are practical, and that are used.
That is so beautiful. It's so true. It is so, and it's such a lovely thing to just like acknowledge. And I'm so glad that you brought this up, because people often ask me, like, how did you start your business? And I started my business when I was 19. I was a college student. And I didn't have any money. I was working 3 jobs and I was going to college and I was paying for myself to get through college. And I just started making these little stuffed toys that are called ragamuffins. And I remember like thinking for years actually that like, why doesn't everybody do this? Like you just go to the thrift store with $20 and you buy enough material to make a couple $100. And I mean, at the time I didn't even have a sewing machine. I had a needle and yarn, and I got through college. Like it's so accessible. And I feel like it's such an important piece of textile upcycling to maintain that accessibility because really anybody who wants to, and when I say want, you have to really want, can start a textile upcycling business. Like all you need is a pair of really good scissors and $20 in a thrift store, or good friends who have, I mean, you don't even need good friends. You can just go in your closet for the most part, but really it's not hard, and it's not, it takes a lot of creative ingenuity. It takes experimentation. It takes all the things that you and I have both done in our lives to come to a place where we're comfortable with the process that we've created for ourselves, our making process. But it's joyful, and it's necessary, I feel like. And I think that it does tell a story. That's another piece of it, right? Like every single thing that you make tells a story of what that material was beforehand. And I love it because I love that, but somebody else is going to love it, and they're not going to know exactly why they love it until they realize, and that light bulb goes on and they're like, oh my goodness, it's jeans, and it takes them a minute. Have you experienced that with people?
Repeatedly.
Isn't it beautiful?
It's beautiful. It happens on a regular basis. And with my work, if I hold up 1 or 2 quilts or different pieces, people can tell, yes, that's denim. Yes, those are blue jeans. But when they look a little closer, that's when I see the light bulb or the aha kind of moment that, oh, those are waistbands. Oh, that hole is a buttonhole. Oh, that is a belt loop, or that is a pocket, or that is some other part, very specific part of a pair of jeans. And I do love that moment of realization when that happens.
Yeah, and it's and it's also, I think that because we all wear clothes every day, that it's familiar. It's almost like nostalgic. It like brings a memory of like, oh, that pair of jeans I had when I was in high school or whatever. Like it just brings there's a story that is evoked in the viewer's mind of a connection to that piece, I feel like.
Yes, it's a wonderful compliment when I hear something like that. Some of the pieces that I make, one of the nicest compliments I've received recently was an artist in a different context who acquired one of my pieces. And as he was describing it, he said, I see things from several feet away. I can see something. If I take 2 steps forward, I see something else. And when I get up almost face to material or face to face with it, that something else appears. And that's part of the realization that I was talking about. That's part of what you just mentioned, in that there's the nostalgia part of it when you recognize it for being jeans. If you step closer and you recognize that it's belt loops or waistbands or pockets, that brings another level of understanding to it. And then when people get up really close, they see the stitches or the thread or some other minute details that, again, another level of realization. And for the work that I do, another piece that we haven't talked about yet is the thread that I use to hand quilt some of these pieces. I save the waistbands. I save the pockets. I've got 15 pounds of zipper flies currently in a bag, pockets, rivets. And one of the things that I've been most excited about recently is that I harvest usable lengths of thread from these same blue jeans. And I wind that up onto pieces of cardboard or spools of other kinds. And I use that thread to hand quilt. Recently, in the past 2 years, almost all of my quilts I've quilted with that harvested thread. And so this person who was getting up face to face with this quilt that's what he was noticing in that comment, that, oh, there's thread and there's hand stitching and there's another level of beauty in those pieces.
That is so cool. That is just amazing. I love that. And, I wonder if you take such pleasure in harvesting that thread. Like, I love unpicking stuff. Like, I hate seam rippers, but I love to like actually pull the thread through. So it's like big, long pieces as I go. That's awesome. So, what do you see yourself like? How do you imagine your work evolving over the next, say, year and a half or 2 years? Like, are you thinking about some new work? Are you experimenting with new fibers or fabrics and types of clothing? What do you see? What's kind of on the horizon for you?
I am so obsessed with denim at the moment. I can't imagine deviating in a big way. I can't imagine deviating too much from that. I do have projects that involve khaki or canvas at the moment. I have a project with shirts, with men's cotton button-down shirts. I have some leather pieces that are in the works, but for the most part, I will continue to work with denim for the foreseeable future. The way I'm getting creative about it is that I'm starting to use different pieces of those blue jeans that I've collected. And right now, I'm working on a piece that is using what are called fly shields or fly extensions from a pair of jeans. And that's the part that supports the zipper in a pair of jeans. And when we zip up and down and when we tug on our waistband and tug on the rivets and the main button, um, that part of the jeans, the zipper fly shield, is one that takes a lot of use and some abuse, if you want to describe it that way. And so when you open it up, it shows unfaded parts. It shows a nice worn folded seam. It shows sometimes holes for the reinforced stitching that has to go into it, and it shows contrasting levels of color, contrasting levels of wear, contrasting levels of usage, and they come out so beautifully. And I've collected so many of those. I think I have about 100 currently that I can use, and I've taken almost half of those in one of my pieces that I'm working on now. And for your audience who can't see, I'm incorporating those fly extensions into accents for a current quilt that I'm working.
Oh my goodness.
So
You guys have to, we're going to definitely share an image of this. Oh my goodness, you guys. It's like shibori. Beautiful, beautiful. So
thank you.
we need a picture of that to put on the show notes page.
I will get you a photo of that.
It sort of reminds me almost of origami.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that, and
The
that's wonderful.
folds, like, oh my goodness. Okay, so this is beautiful. So, yeah, we're going to need all of the information that we've been talking about will be available on our show notes page. You guys, you can find that at rags2riches.eco. Eliu Hernandez is going to be, our guest, obviously, and Made or Remade is his Instagram place to find him. Now, Eliu, you don't have a website right now, so Instagram's the best place for people to reach out if they want to get in touch.
Correct.
Cool. And then I noticed as well on your Instagram that you had like a show and there was a link there. You could like look at a bunch of images of your work. So poke around his Instagram. There's a little like some details that are kind of really interesting and show some of the historical pieces that you were working on and also your new and current stuff. So really awesome. I'm so excited to have had this opportunity to chat with you and just learn more about your process. I hope that we get to stay in touch because I actually have a big pile of denim that, I don't know if I should send it to you like in an unmarked box or.
I think my wife's going to be hearing this, so I
won't. What's your wife's name?
Marissa.
I won't send it, Marissa. I won't. Awesome. Well, is there anything that you'd like to share before we sign off on our episode? I just feel like there's so much richness that we've discussed, but there might be something we didn't talk about.
Thank you. I think we could continue the conversation for another hour or two, but to just continue on the point that I was making, I'm using those fly shields. The piece that I sold recently included belt loops, tiny swatches that take a considerable amount of time to deconstruct and to make usable. I've used waistbands in 5 different quilts. I'm in the process of using pockets, and I'm in the process of incorporating zipper flies into upcoming pieces. The ideas are endless. They come pouring out of the head. It's the other resources, the time, the energy, the motivation, the money that limit, that are more limiting in their nature. But yeah. Always thinking and always creatively thinking about what to do.
That's so cool. And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I really look forward to just watching your work progress and staying in touch, because you're really onto something really super beautiful.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, so I'm over here and I'm serving you a giant air hug because you just finished another episode of the Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast. Thank you for being with me. Our music is provided by The Lucky Five. Learn more about them at thelucky5.com. Our show is produced and edited by Vandal Hyacinth. If you want to dive in deep, head over to Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast.com.